Okay, hello, good evening. Welcome to this evening's live session. To give you a bit of background, um, I've been coaching and training and public speaking for almost 20 years now. A lot of the time I spend these days actually training coaches, training speakers, training trainers. And one of the most fascinating subjects that usually gets covered, and one about which I get a lot of inquiries, is that of using stories and what we call in the coaching world and the therapy world, therapeutic metaphor. And I think some of it stems from the fact that I have a tremendous love of telling stories. It's fascinated me since I was a child. I've told stories for many, many years. I have thoroughly enjoyed doing so. And I think people who come through a lot of my trainings probably experience that. So I've had a lot of emails saying, can you do a short session about storytelling? So here we are. Now, this evening's session is being recorded. So if you have registered and you are not able to join us, fear not, stress not. You will be receiving an email within the next 48 hours with a link in order to be able to view this evening's session. So I guess the first question we should ask is why? Why should we be interested in telling stories? And who should be interested in telling stories? Well, the why, I think, is because, well, I can give you three key reasons. The first is that stories have a phenomenal influence on the mind. So whether you be a teacher, a trainer, a coach, a therapist, a public speaker, a parent, some kind of community leader, then the ability to craft good stories and tell stories with a meaning can be phenomenally influential on the minds of people that you're working with. The second that is that it actually connects people to you. So if you're a good speaker and you use stories, or a good coach and you use stories, or a good trainer or teacher and you use stories, what happens is that people enjoy your story. And because they enjoy their story, they relate to you, they connect with you, they connect to you. So they're more likely to want more from you, they're more likely to come back to you, they're more likely to get more from you. So it builds that bond much better. And of course, at a base level, it helps us to achieve a great deal of success by achieving the outcomes that we set for ourselves in terms of creating change, and perhaps even building a business or building a career on doing so. And I think I've already answered the who, because I haven't yet met anybody who didn't enjoy a good story. You know, I've done a lot of training around the world over the last almost 20 years, and I've never ceased to be amazed. You know, I've walked into training rooms in the Middle East where I'm faced with some fairly kind of straight-faced looking gentlemen, and I tell them a story, and you can see them loosen. You can actually witness the change in their connection with you as they listen to a story. And the reasoning behind that is because, you know, if you think about it, you can go back thousands and thousands of years, at a time before there were even stone tablets, before there were clay tablets, before there was paper, before there were pens, before there was the typewriter and the word processor and the tablet and the devices that as we call them now, there was word of mouth. And stories were used to great success by leaders, by village elders, by shaman, by religious influencers, by lawgivers, in order to pass on a message, to pass on the rules, the morals, the ethics, the history, the stories of greatness, the stories of achievement. So it's gone on for thousands of years. And the science behind that is about what goes on in here. Because you may or may not already be aware that the mind, the unconscious mind or subconscious mind, as Freud liked to call it, cannot tell the difference between a vividly imagined scene, a dream, a daydream, and reality. I mean, have you ever had that where you've been having a dream and you wake up and for a moment you're not sure whether that was a dream and now you're awake, or that was reality and now you're dreaming? I know it happens to me sometimes, but perhaps that's my age, who knows. So it's the unconscious mind cannot tell the difference between the two. So if you craft a story well, tell a story well, the unconscious mind gets engaged in it. The other thing, of course, is that the unconscious mind takes things personally. That's why, you know, when you go to the movies, you go to the cinema, you watch a film, watch a movie, and it has a tremendous impact on you. And the reason is because while your consciousness is being entertained by the big screen, whether it be Star Wars or Lord of the Rings or a romantic comedy or whatever it is that you enjoy, while your conscious mind is being entertained by what's going on that big screen, your unconscious mind is seeking meaning, because your unconscious mind, one of its prime directives, if you like, is to seek meaning, to look for what it can learn from every single experience. Everything that happens to you, your unconscious mind is learning from it, seeking meaning, seeking learning, and it seeks resolution. So when a story is not finished, the unconscious mind goes, what's happening? Where's this going? You just think about it for a moment. You watch soap operas on the TV, and at the end of each episode of the soap opera, what happens? You get a cliffhanger. The cliffhanger leaves you wanting to know what happens next. If it's well done, it can almost guarantee that you will tune in next time. Why? Because this up here wants resolution, it wants meaning, it wants to understand. So the neuroscience, if you like, behind the power of the storyteller is that the unconscious mind is geared to work in metaphor. We dream in metaphor. You know, sometimes people have really amazing dreams. They come and tell me about their dreams, and basically what they're doing is their mind is creating a story around what it's learning from what's been happening to it. And so many of these stories are, in essence, a hero's journey. You think of some of the great films that we've seen over the last 30 years. You watch things like the Star Wars, I was going to say the Star Wars trilogy, but it's turned into the Star Wars ongoing saga now. Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, all of these kind of things. And when you look at any of these, there is generally a lead character, a hero, male or female. And that hero, that lead character, is embarking upon some kind of a journey, not necessarily a journey, a physical journey of distance. It may be an emotional journey. It may be a spiritual journey. It may be a psychological journey. No matter, it's still a journey. And that journey always has a place where it begins, a place where it ends, usually with a positive and constructive resolution. That's why people like stories with happy endings. And the key elements that are in there are the things that happen to that hero along the way, the things, the experiences that occur along that journey. And you as the viewer are drawn into that. You're drawn into it at an unconscious level. The mirror neuron in your brain is firing because it's relating to what it sees. It's getting drawn in, it's enjoying the journey, and it's seeking to learn from it. So my purpose here this evening really is to look at how you and I can write a great story. Because one of the things that I have observed, and I've had an opportunity to watch some great people in action, and I've had an opportunity to watch some okay people in action, and I've had the opportunity to watch some pretty dreadful people in action. What separates the great from the good and the good from the not so good is the ability to connect, to influence, to carry their audience, whether that audience be 9-year-old children or 59-year-old senior executives. A good story will carry them, will influence them. So I'd like to share with you some golden rules for writing a good story. And I can't remember who said it, but the three things you, in essence, must have for a good story are: you must have a beginning, you must have a middle, and of course, it's really useful to have an ending. So in crafting your story, and I generally suggest that if you're going to write a story, that you get some post-it notes and some flip chart paper or a blank wall and actually storyboard your story so that you have the elements of your story and you can move them around until you're very happy with the story. The other things you've got to have, of course, you've got to have your hero, male or female or a group. And of course, within the group, you can also have the hero and the not so hero. So you have the group dynamics that come in there as well. So think about who is that person. You need to think about what are the obstacles, what are the barriers, what are the challenges that that person or persons is going to face on that metaphoric journey. What do those barriers, what do those obstacles, what do those challenges actually represent in the real world? Because what we want in our story is that people who are listening to it are entertained by the story and they're not consciously picking it apart for what applies to them. They're just listening to a good story. So you want those challenges and obstacles, and conversely, you need the resources. You've got to have the resources in there. Let's take a great movie. Take any of the Lord of the Rings films. You've got the lead character. You've got your hero, Frodo, and the other characters who are connected to him. His journey is to take that ring to its final destination. So from starting to ending. The challenges that he faces along the way are many and varied. You've got things like orcs and dwarves and elves and mountains and monsters and giants, and all of the other things that actually represent the elements of evil, the elements of what is bad, the elements of what can challenge you and destroy you in the world. And of course, the resources, the key resources are some of them are the people that he is involved with, the other people in his merry band, are resources, weaponry that they carry with them, items that they carry with them, even the ring itself that he carries, that he treasures, that is both his gift and his terrible burden, is a resource in itself, even though it's a resource with a backlash, if you like. It's got teeth. So you've got all of the elements in there, and then you craft it to make it go together. Now, if you are writing this story as a coach, a therapist, a trainer, even as a parent or a teacher, some key things to think about are this. One of them is that you must depersonalize your story. For those of you who are listening to this or watching this and have some understanding of neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, the term is to displace referential index. To displace referential index. That's big talk for make it not about the person you're talking to. So if I'm sitting face to face with you as my client and I'm telling you a story, I'm not telling you a story that you can immediately relate to you, not at a conscious level. At a conscious level, you're listening to the story. As a parent, I might want to tell a story to my children, maybe a bedtime story that will entertain them, that will enthuse them, that will enthrall them, and yet in amongst that story is a message, and that message could be about understanding or tolerance or loving or learning or just doing your homework, you know? So you have the displaced referential index. In other words, it's depersonalized so that people don't immediately start using their conscious mind to unpick the story. You've got to identify the parallels. So you want to be sure that the story that you're telling has obstacles in there so that the person who's listening will apply it to self, has resources in there. Because for those of you who have been dropping in for my daily Facebook Lives, you will remember that I think last week I was going through the presuppositions of NLP. And one of them is we have all of the resources in here that we need to succeed. Now, as a coach, as a therapist, as a trainer, as a teacher, what we want is for the listener to tap into their personal qualities, their personal resources, whether that's courage, whether that's creativity, whether that's perseverance, whether that's assertiveness, whether that's understanding, tolerance, teamwork, whatever it is that you want them to tap into, you build an obstacle in there and a resource that will connect them to that story. You then craft your story. And if you've got some sense, having crafted your story, you will make sure that somewhere in there, you put some kind of a cliffhanger so that you can, if you wish, leave off the story and come back to it at another stage. And the reasoning behind that is because in the world of accelerated learning, we use storytelling a great deal. And one of the things that some of you who've been through my trainings will know and probably hate me for is that I will start telling you a story in the morning, but I don't finish the story. I then drop into my teaching day, and at the end of the day, I will pick it up and I will close the loop on the story. But that's for another time. My aim here is to give you this taste of the things that you can learn, the things that you can discover about storytelling, the things that I teach within the context of my NLP training, my coaching training, my hypnosis training, etc. So that's crafting a story. Once you've got your story, you practice it and practice it. And of course, the next stage from there is, having crafted your story, is to tell that story. Okay, and some of the key tips that I can give you around telling a good story are simple and basic, and yet so many people don't tap into them. And the first is step into the role, step into the character who's in the story. If you can do voices, do voices. If you can't do voices, at least do emotion. At least bring the character to life. Modulate your voice so that at times when the story becomes exciting, when the story becomes tense, when the story becomes almost nerve-wracking, you're putting that into your voice. And another time when the story needs to come down in pace because you want your audience to just settle for a moment. Or maybe you want the story to be a little bit scary. Then you modulate your voice accordingly. And there are times when silence is golden. Because in storytelling, just like in good comedy, timing is critical. So utilize your voice, utilize everything that you can. Get people carrying along with you. Pause for effect. And in fact, I've been known very often at a critical moment in a story to stop for a drink of water, literally to leave an audience hanging there. So those are the key elements to telling a story. When I run my storytelling workshops, one of the things we spend a lot of time doing is actually getting to grips with getting up there and becoming the storyteller. Becoming the storyteller. Now, moving on from the what and the how, it's the what kind of content can you put into a story? And when I first started off storytelling, I used to tell kind of business anecdotes. You know, I'd talk about clients who had had certain problems and how we'd overcome the problems, and that's fairly direct. I mean, that's straightforward sales talk. I then began to experiment with something new and different. And that is, I began to appeal to the child in my audience, and I began to craft stories that were more fantastical, more mythical, or more historic. So I have stories around martial artists from hundreds of years ago. I have stories around Buddhism, Zen. I have stories around castles and dungeons and dragons and the history of, you know, I'm English, I live in England. If you travel around England, you'll find castles everywhere. And I tell stories based around 1,000 years ago. Every one of the stories can be applied to today in terms of the meaning of that. So it really doesn't matter what you tell your story about. And I remember walking into a room where there were 35 gentlemen sitting in Saudi Arabia, all sitting there, all dressed exactly the same, all clad in white, and thinking to myself, okay, I'm going to tell these guys a story. So I said, literally, can I tell you a story? Would you like to hear a story? And there was a kind of a hesitant, yes, okay. So I launched into a story that I tell, which is called The Tea Master. And I stopped at an appropriate moment and I left them with a cliffhanger. And at the end of the day, they wouldn't let me out of the room until I finished the story. Now, I was on it was a 5-day module on a leadership development program. And I finished up telling them a different story every day. And they wouldn't start the day until I'd started the story. So even when you think you're in a room with people who might not appreciate a story, trust me, they will appreciate a story. So be prepared to create some stories. Go away from here and write some stories. Hey, you can contact me through my website, www.ralphwatson.com. Email me, send me your stories. I'll give you some feedback on your stories quite happily. Share them with me, video them, write them, voice record them, whatever you like. The other element here is about telling your story. Because one of the things that people will often want to do is to get to know you, to understand you. So if you are a speaker and you want to share something about you and your life, and I see some really great speakers out there who have had some inspirational experiences in their life. People who've come through tremendous hardship, tremendous disaster, and they have survived that. And they stand up and they tell their story. And sometimes they tell that story and it engages me and it takes me along with them. It inspires me. And sometimes they stand up and tell that story and I think, oh, have you missed an opportunity? So if you're going to tell your story, some things to remember are, be you. Tell your story. Tell it from here. And people will love you if you share with them that you're a human being. Share with them that you have screwed up, that you have made mistakes, that you have had tears, and share with them your joys. You know, in 25 years in a corporate career, with tremendous success and a lot of mistakes, and 20 years of running my own business with a lot of success and a lot of mistakes, I screwed up a lot. I messed up a lot. I wore a mask. I pretended to be something that I wasn't. When I learned the lesson of being me, of telling people my story, exactly how my story is, changed the world for me, changed the way that people connected with me, changed the way that people do business with me. And those of you who've sat in a room with me will probably understand that. So people want to know you. Tell them your story and tell it from here. Remember that stories work here. They work here, but they should be told from here and through here. So, if you want to know more about telling stories, please feel free to contact me. That's www.ralphwatson.com. I'll be happy to tell you more about telling stories, and keep your eye open for my storytelling workshops, for my trainer training, which is coming up very soon, during which we will feature quite heavily on stories for a change, words that change your minds. And it's been my privilege to have shared this with you. I hope you have found it useful. I look forward to sharing some more with you again real soon. Thank you for honoring me with your time. And I will leave you with this thought. Be nice, because wherever you go, there you are. But that's another story. Bye for now.